Hello again, this is Scott Moore from the Bight and Powell Service Association, continuing to review some of the knots that are part of Rover Practical Training. This time I'm going to do a bowline on a bight. A bowline is also known as a rescue knot. The reason being, when you make a bowline, the loop that you end up with will not change in size. If you put a stress on the rope or a load on the rope, the knot remains the same size. So you can use it for a water rescue or something like that. Somebody can place the rope around themselves, and no matter how hard you pull on it, the rope is not going to be constrictive in any way. Tying a bowline, however, requires working the end of the rope. If you don't have access to the end of the rope and you have merely a bight in the middle of the rope, you can still tie a bowline in it, known as a bowline on a bight. And I have the two working ends of the rope over my shoulder, so all I have in front of me is this loop. So if you're familiar with how you tie a bowline, it's very similar, except you're essentially taking two strands and doing it with two strands at the same time. So I'm still going to take the bowline and I'm going to make a loop, which is kind of the starting point for any bowline. There's my loop. And I'm going to take my my bight. That's going to come up through the hole, or through the loop that I've made. So I'm going to try to get that all in the camera there so you can kind of follow what I did. So I made this one loop on top, brought the rope down, and essentially brought it back up through the loop. These two loops at the bottom, these are going to be your loops that are not going to change in size. So these are going to be your rescue loops, if you will. So my working bight, if you will, once I bring that through, I'm essentially going to take everything below it and pull that through. And then pull my rope tight, both my loops and my standing ends. And once I pull that tight, you can see the more pressure I put on it, it's not changing in size. The loops are staying the same size. You can actually, before you tighten it, you can actually work this knot if you want to make two different size loops. In this case, both my loops were about the same. I didn't try to vary them at all. But if you trace this knot, once it's done, you'll see it's essentially two bowline knots in parallel. The only difference is where you would usually have an end, the working end of the rope would come out and stick out above this knot. The two working ends are essentially connected when you do it on a bight. So that's a bowline on a bight. Another knot that's required for practical training is a fisherman's knot, which is for attaching a rope to a spar or to a hook or to an eye. It's called a fisherman's knot specifically because the most popular application is tying fishing line to the loop on a fish hook. So this spar is going to be our what we're going to be tying to. So here's my working end of my rope. I'm going to bring my rope down behind my spar. I'm going to do 2 turns around the rope. Going to bring my working end behind my standing end. And right now I'm very close. You can see that? I'm very close to what I would do if I wanted to tie either a taut line or 2 half hitches two turns and a half hitch for a sliding knot. But instead of putting my working end through the loop I just made above the spar, I'm actually going to take my working end down and parallel to my spar and behind the two loops I made. So, and I'm going to try to give myself a little bit, loosen up a little bit, work it just to give myself a little bit more on my working end. There we go. So now I'm going to take my working end back up to my standing end and behind it. I'm going to come around the front and stick my working end through the loop above the spar. So there you go. And then when I pull this and push it all together and pull it tight, that's my fisherman's hitch or my fisherman's knot. So rather than just wrap the rope around the spar, you've actually got the two turns around the spar, and the rope itself, because you passed it through those two turns, is actually tied or attached to the spar as well. So that's a fisherman's hitch or a fisherman's bend or a fisherman's knot. Now the next one I'm going to do is the man harness. And a man harness is for attaching a rope around a hook or a point, or if you're going to slide it over a spar. Now the one catch, if you will, with the man harness is if there's not a load in the loop you create in the man harness, it can easily slip. So there's actually a knot called an alpine butterfly, which if you need to make a loop in a rope that's going to be more stable, the alpine butterfly is preferred. However, in non-critical cases, the loop made by a man harness may be all you need for your application. So the kind of simple way to start and do a man harness is to actually make a pretzel of the rope. So I'm going to go essentially, I'm going to try to make it look a little bit more like a pretzel. There we go. There's my pretzel. So I'm going to try to hold that there so you can kind of follow the pattern of the rope. I took my end, made one loop, back around, stayed on top, back around again, and I didn't tuck it or go under. Everything, every wrap, every turn stayed on top of the rope until my very end. I took my working end and I tucked it behind. Once I have that pretzel shape, I'm going to take my bottom loop here. I'm going to take my bottom loop and I'm going to draw it behind and up through this loop. So it's going to come out where my finger is. So, or I can just reach down there, grab it, and pull it up through. And that gives me, when I tighten it up, that gives me, that gives me my man harness. So I can put that around a hook or a post or a docking pin on a boat dock or something like that. So the rope is then secured to that pin. Okay, that's it for now. Keep on staying tuned as I'll eventually cover all the different splices and knots and lashings and hitches that are required for practical training.